With the release of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, I figured it would be the perfect time to stop and rank all of these 7 movies in the Mission Impossible franchise from the worst to the best. Let's get started. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Ben, and on this channel I love to talk about movies and TV, and if you also love to talk about movies and TV, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. Before we get into this, be sure to let me know down below in the comment section what is your ranking of the Mission Impossible franchise. Our list may be different, and that's okay, but be sure to let me know your thoughts on each of the movies as well if you would like. For a little bit of context, I am a fan of this franchise, and I don't really think most of these movies are all that bad, except for one maybe, and I actually think that a lot of them are pretty great. But with that being said, let's get started. The movie that I was alluding to earlier, coming in last place, is going to be the only bad movie on this list, I think, Mission Impossible 2. Now, this is easily the cheesiest movie of the franchise, and because of that, it feels like an outlier. I do not like this movie, plain and simple. It at times feels like Ethan Hunt is a completely different character than how he was already established as a character in the first movie. There is terrible dialogue, some really dated visual effects, which 20 years later are not going to hold up well. Plain and simple, some scenes genuinely disgusted me with the cheesiness. It's very rare that cheesiness will work in movies for me, I feel, with a handful of exceptions, but in this franchise that really does take itself pretty seriously, it does not fit. This movie as a whole doesn't really fit, doesn't really have a place. I don't think that John Woo's direction was the right step to take for this franchise. I mean, it nearly could have killed it. It was honestly boring, never really thrilling, which was really a bad thing about this movie because Mission Impossible movies, aside from maybe this one, all have at least one really thrilling sequence. The action was fine at the end of the day, but this was just a disappointing follow-up to the first movie. But speaking of the first movie, coming in 6th place is going to be Mission Impossible. Now, there is definitely a big gap between 2 and the original. I think this is a good old-fashioned spy thriller that is definitely not a flashy movie by any means. It works so well in its simplicity. I thoroughly enjoyed the different shots utilized by Brian De Palma here. The Dutch angles especially were a nice addition. Like I just quickly mentioned, there's at least one thrilling sequence amongst a couple is the dangling sequence, the most memorable sequence of the movie. The one that this movie is most known for, of course, but that sequence is very well done, it's intense. Why this movie is a little bit lower on this list though, is the fact that it is pretty predictable by the time everything starts to unravel. I had seen the movie before, so maybe that had something to do with it, but I still did find myself picking up on little things here and there that you could have noticed had it have been my first time watch. I also think the visual effects are pretty poor in the third act, and it wasn't really necessary for this movie. For a movie that is pretty tame and then just goes a little bit outlandish in the last couple minutes with the plane in the tunnel. That's a very minor issue, and something that I'm going to be mentioning a couple more times on this list is that this movie is a little convoluted for sure, but it is a very solid espionage flick at the end of the day. Above that, I have Mission Impossible 3, maybe the most personal and intimate movie on this list. There are a lot of high emotional stakes in this one, and that's what I just really enjoyed. The opening right out of the gate sucked me in. It had me hooked, probably the best opening of the franchise in my opinion, because of just how intense it gets you right out of the gate. The angst is at an all-time high, and I just think that as a whole, this movie is consistently intense, which is pretty good. It's well directed, fairly fast-paced, and doesn't really ever slow down. While the side characters are a bit lackluster, I think that Philip Seymour Hoffman is a solid villain. A lot of people say that he's the best of the franchise. I wish there was a little bit more of him. I feel like he would have had a much stronger presence in the movie had he have been in it a little bit more, and then he would have been a more intimidating threat. I also think the movie lost me a bit after the first hour, and I don't know if I loved the last hour as much as I enjoyed the first hour that much, but the most memorable thing about this movie for me is how personal and intimate it felt, like I said. A pretty consistent theme throughout the movies later on is that Ethan feels responsible for those around him and the safety of those. That was all pretty much set up in this movie. How he loses Kerry Russell's character early on and he feels a bit responsible for that, and then having to keep Michelle Monaghan's character safe. I really enjoyed that aspect. This is definitely a solid entry. In 4th place, I have Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. This is a movie that manages to be a fun action flick while also being pretty intense throughout. The superb team dynamic is such a big standout here. I feel like this is the first time in the franchise where there was a real sense of a team dynamic. There's little glimpses of that in the movies prior to this one, but here they just rub off each other really well with funny moments. Simon Pegg really gets to shine, but also Jeremy Renner too, who I kind of feel like just got lost in this franchise for whatever reason. Tom Cruise scaling the Burj Khalifa is the most memorable sequence of the movie. And that's for good reason. It's an absolutely spectacular sequence that I would have loved to see on a big screen. I think this movie is a bit too long and it gets a little bit messy towards the latter half of the film. And plus there are some pacing issues and that's what docks it down a couple spots. This is one that has some highlights for sure, but it's not as strong as I feel like it could have been, and not as strong as I was hoping it would have been. But coming in third place is the newly released Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Now if you want to hear my full in-depth thoughts on this movie, I'll leave my review linked right up above. But as for my quick thoughts on it, it's a movie that even now I'm still just trying to digest. I do think it's a great film and I am very positive on it, though I do have some issues. That being that, plain and simple, this movie just gets convoluted. It's overly long and it feels a little bit repetitive. But when it comes to being a part 1, it's really strong. It sets up a lot of stuff and there's a lot of payoff at the end, but then there's going to be even more payoff in the second movie. One of my favorite parts was the villain, that being AI. How menacing they built it up to be without even being a character in and of itself was really cool. And it's by now in the franchise where they're just continuously upping the ante, especially in the action sequences. The action was insane, incredibly intense, just like edge of your seat moments. Maybe by the time that part 2 even comes out, this one will be even higher up on this list. I think subsequent rewatches could make me even enjoy it more. But our runner-up is going to be Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. I thought this was a total thrill ride with fantastic action, just a movie that is a lot of fun. This was Christopher McQuarrie's first movie in this franchise, and he just brings such a fresh vision. Behind the camera, he's perfection, and one of the best things to maybe even happen to this franchise. And I also feel like that he really reinvigorated the love that so many of us have for the Mission Impossible movies. There's a whole new level of intensity with everyone after Hunt, which we see in a lot of these Mission Impossible movies, but here it might be the strongest, and the pacing is terrific. Plus there's a really solid, menacing villain in Sean Harris who is just so easy to hate. I can see this one being the one that I want to rewatch the most over the years. But coming in first place is going to be Mission Impossible Fallout, the movie that a lot of people claim to be one of the best action movies ever made. I think I might be there, though I do think this movie isn't perfect. There are so many moving pieces to it that at first I didn't like that aspect, but it actually managed to keep me more invested and keep me wanting more answers. So I feel like in this movie's case, that worked. This is an utter edge-of-your-seat spectacle. Even watching it at home, not on the big screen like an IMAX screen, it is so thoroughly intense, with the sound design being a big part of that, the action being just incredible, and I love the use of IMAX cameras. Everything shot on IMAX was genuinely jaw-dropping. It's a darker film and has a more somber tone. There are big stakes, but you just can't help but have a fun time watching it though, because it's just an action movie that keeps you totally invested throughout. I haven't given any props to Tom Cruise yet in this video, and I really just have to applaud him for everything that he has done for these movies. Especially Fallout, he has opened the door for so many following action movies to come, to break different boundaries. He really is the king of doing that, I feel, in action movies. But that is it for my ranking of the Mission Impossible franchise. Be sure to let me know down below in the comment section what is your ranking of all the movies. I would love to see your lists, and I want to thank you so much for watching this video. And again, if you did enjoy it, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, as well as that notification bell so you don't miss any further videos. And as always, look forward to more videos and reviews coming soon. My name is Ben, people call me Meteor, and I'll see you guys in the next one.